the background of the sayings of the Desert Fathers is just the tradition of wisdom literature in general. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, we are familiar with the Proverbs or wisdom sayings. You read the book of Proverbs, chapter 24. I went past the field of a sluggard, and past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I applied to my heart to what I observed and learned a lesson from what I saw. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. So you get this idea, the parable, and then the describing of the parable. This is very, very common wisdom literature, and it forms the background, the biblical background of what comes through then in the sayings of the Desert Fathers. You find similar kinds of literature in the intertestamental period from Jewish Hellenism. Philosophical literature, Plato's dialogues are filled with this kind of thing. And so when you have both the Hebrew and the Greek background, and then they merge into Alexandrian or just Hellenistic Christianity in general in later years. Jesus was obviously, and we consider Jesus to be a very wise person. And Jesus taught in kind of a dialogue fashion. And early on, you have these collections of Jesus' logia, or Jesus' sayings. And it's part of the origins of the gospel. For example, Luke chapter 9, verses 46 through 48. An argument arose among them, namely among Jesus' disciples, as to which of them was the greatest. But Jesus, aware of their inner thoughts, took a little child and put it by his side. And he said to them, "Whoever welcomes this child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes him who sent me. For the least among you is the greatest." Again, very similar style of teaching. This kind of wise sayings, development of parables, these kinds of things. And you'll see this in lots of world religions, Buddhism and Hinduism, and a lot of stuff like that. Sufis, similar.
The Prophet Muhammad, the sayings, the what they call the Sunnah,
Yeah.
is a lot of it used in teaching. It was sayings and things, and just as he went along on daily life, things he said about children or on people. The same kind of dialogue.
Yeah, some of this is in Hadith as well. You find these same kinds of things. Yeah.
So we're going to be doing the Desert Fathers.
Yes.
Parables and sayings.
So I'm giving you the background to these sorts of things. Now, we're going to jump then from Jesus to Scetus. Scetus is Warina Trun. You all know that, right?
No.
Okay, someone.
Yes, Shihid. I think Shihid.
Do you know where Saint Bishoy Monastery?
No.
It's okay. It's very close to Arafura.
Oh, okay. So they're
the same area. Yeah.
So that's where he's writing about.
Yes.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, Scetus, no. Again, I just repeat the physical arrangements. You've got individual locations where separate monks live, and they come together every once in a while for going to service and having conversation among one another. And you have these 4 different congregations of people that meet. And then at the center of this is this respect for the holy man, the sage, the spiritual father, and we'll cover that in another lecture. And so the writings, the writings of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, by the way, these writings are rooted in the relationship between a spiritual father and the disciple. That relationship is absolutely at the core of the development of these sayings, because it comes out of this oral tradition to begin with. And they want to, it gives you the way that the sayings are written. They're written in a way so that you, the reader, get a peek into that relationship. Do you know what I mean? It's not written from the point of view of the spiritual father. It's written more from the point of view of the follower getting to look at this interaction between two people. Do you see what I mean? Okay. The sayings are essentially conceived then to give the impression of this direct contact between the disciple and his spiritual master. And I think that's enough I want to say. The early collections, one of the first collections is by a guy named Evagrius Pontus, and we will cover Evagrius later on in our lecture series. I think that's tomorrow. Yeah, because tomorrow is all day, or morning and afternoon. Yeah, so we will cover Evagrius in that. And Evagrius was actually the one, at least as far as we know, to make the first collection of written sayings. I'm sure that there's just no doubt that people had collected these orally, they remembered them, and repeated them back to each other. But Evagrius was the first one to actually write this down. And he did it in a book called the Practicos. And in Practicos, for example, Practicos 91, he writes, it is a very necessary thing also to examine carefully the ways of the monks who have traveled in an earlier age straight along the road and to direct oneself along the same paths. Many excellent sayings and deeds are found that have been left behind them. So you see what he's doing? Evagrius is saying, these are people that we can imitate, we can follow. And I'm now going to tell you in my book some of the sayings that these people had so that you can appreciate and follow them. Does that make sense? So, among them is the following statement told by one of their number. A dry and regular diet joined with charity leads the monk more quickly into the harbor of purity of heart. The same man delivered a certain brother from disquieting specters by which he was visited, disquieting specters like demons or things like that, by which he was visited in the night by ordering him to minister to the sick and fast while he did this. When asked about his rationale for employing this procedure, it's like, wait a minute, I came to you and because I wanted you to, deliver me from the demons. And instead you told me to fast and take care of people? And so the response is the response, I lost the page. The response is that the same man was delivered, when asked about it, he replied, such afflictions are extinguished by no other remedy so well as by mercy. So it's not by some, fancy thing, but by caring for people, you actually deliver yourself from this demon. So you get the idea of Evagrius first making these kind of summaries of wisdom statements and stories. Make sense? Okay. Now, a little piece of background history then. You have in the late 4th century and very, very early 5th century, you have a phenomenon known as the Origenist controversy. I have brought all the way from another part of Cairo an expert in the Origenist controversy. And so would you like to come and summarize that for us?
So this controversy arose up in Nitria, where there are many monks there. It's all about the teaching of Origen and his followers, not only Origen, and particularly Evagrius' teaching. So Origen and Evagrius' teaching. So it's about the letter when Theophilus was the bishop, the pope at this point, and when he heard about it, he heard that there is like the anthropomorphism. There were the anthropomorphites or the anthropomorphism. I don't want to say heresy. I will say dispute. Okay. They say about it that they look at God as He has hands and feet and like a human.
Yeah.
So there is a conflict in the understanding of God has real like organs, feet, hands, stuff like this, or just He came and became like human like us. Or so there is a debate around this, and even in the historian writings like Palladius, Sozomen, and like John Cashon, he wrote about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different views of this particular person. Okay. So the point is, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but what's your point from this to here?
5 brothers.
Oh, okay, the
five
five
tall
brothers.
brothers.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there were monks who follow Origen and Evagrius, and there were like a community of monks who are very, very educated. Like the five tall brothers. One of them was ordained a priest, and the others were like teachers for other groups of monks. There were a debate and a problem in the desert because of this. When they heard about the letter of Theophilus, he said this is like a heresy. God doesn't have hands or feet, or doesn't have like what you imagine about it. So he wrote the letter and he sent it to all monasteries in Egypt. The letter came to Nicaea, and John Cashon, the one who recorded this, and said that they received a letter in bitterness. They don't like what Theophilus wrote about it. And then John Cashon when he recorded this, he has another story about another monk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go for a long time now.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
What we want is to get to the 5 brothers and how they ended up having to leave.
Oh, okay, where they leave them.
Yeah.
When they leave, okay.
Yeah.
When there is a lot of story about the monk who think that God has hands, and stuff, and there is another monk who corrects this in Cashon 10. If you go to Cashon 10, you will find the whole story about it and all details of it. Okay. Then after that, so we said this. The letter came to all monks, and they are now there. We have like 2 groups of monks. One with the Origenist thought, one without, or against. So the anthropomorphites say that they collected a group of the anthropomorphites, and they went to Theophilus, the bishop, and they said, no, this is what the Bible said. This is not our saying, this is what the Bible said. Okay? They got the verse of the Genesis 1:26 that the Lord has created us on His image, right? So this word mentioned a lot in the literature talking about this controversy. Then when they went to the bishop changed his mind, and he said that when I saw you, I saw God's face. So it is the same. You got the point from this?
No, say that again.
Okay. The bishop, when he said the people, the crowd, and they threatened his life, as Socrates described the story. It's not my story. Socrates described the story as this.
She's a historian.
The historian, right? So he said that when I saw you, the crowd of monks, the Nitrian monk who came to support the anthropomorphic thought, he said, when I saw you, I saw the face of God. So
Because
now
this
he changed his he changed his mind now. Okay. Then after that, he decided to go. He gathered all monks. He wrote a message to the monks, and he gathered people from bishops from all places, and he wrote letters to monks in Nitria against the Origenist thoughts and against Origen and his followers' teaching. Of course, Origen at this time was not present, but his teaching and his followers. And one of them is Evagrius. Okay. In my research, I find different views of this, but it's not the time now to mention everything. But after that, when they gathered as bishops, they decided to get out those monks who make the disturbance in Nitria, who are the tall monks, the 5 tall monks. And before, they were in a very good relationship with Theophilus, but after this, the situation is changed. So the bishop goes to Nitria, and he gets out these monks away from Nitria. They flee to Palestine.
End of story.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Hey. Okay, so now you have monks in Nitria, Scetis. You have now a few monks, very highly recognized monks by some, and they are in Palestine. Well, now, move them years forward, and you have in 444, you have the martyrdom, you have the 49 martyrs. And so that's in the same location, or nearly the same location, the martyrdom of the 49. And so, again, this particular monastery is coming under lots of problems and people have to leave. So some of them go to Palestine. And then further, you have more problems, and so ultimately you have a lot of this monastery that ends up fleeing, and they end up, it's dilapidated, and they have to go to Palestine. So you have a relocation of many monks who were originally from Scetis, only they are now located in Syria, Palestine. Make sense?
Why did they go there?
Oh, because the original Tall Brothers went there. And there are some very recognized monasteries there, in Bethlehem and the Mount of Olives. Okay? Yes?
and that caused the problem with John Chrysostom.
Sauce what?
With John Chrysostom.
Chrysostom, yes.
Chrysostom?
Yes, it's a part of it.
When-
John Chrysostom after that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
Oh,
part of it, yes.
that's still part of the problem.
Part of the problem.
Yeah. We
Because
won't
he
solve all
support-
of that right
he
now.
support the Origenist monk
Yes, yeah.
that flee to Palestine.
Yeah. The one thing, why I bring all of this up is that at some point there is this displaced community from Scetis that they probably partially relocated in Palestine, in the wadis of the West Bank of Palestine. And it was probably there, in this location, that at the end of the 5th century, 480, 490 BC, or AD, I'm sorry, that the refugee monks made the first attempts to record, we no longer have the oral memory. We're not located in the same way that we used to. Let's start writing these sayings down. Do you see what I mean? So they want to preserve the memory of what was there in Scetis and the surrounding area. So they begin to write the sayings down. Their object was to fix for posterity the memory of a land and a life they had been forced to abandon. At least that's the major opinion of how the sayings came to be. Now, there's a number of different collections of these sayings. That's part of the difficulty of the literature itself, is that, and that's the way it is with lots of these collections of things. You know, that some people collect these and some people collect those, and how do you know which is which? And so there have been a number of different collections. Most people will believe that the first collection is what is called the alphabetic collection. And by alphabetic collection, we mean that they are sayings collected by name of person. Abba Pambo, Abba Antony, Abba Piamon, you know. And they list them, Abba Moses, by alphabetical order. And then perhaps people think that after that, then there came what was called the anonymous collection. And they don't even know who made this saying. They just have sayings. And then after that, people began to make a systematic collection. And a systematic collection was not a collection by name, but a collection by topic. Here's some sayings on asceticism. Here are some sayings on worship. Here are some sayings on relationships with your brothers and sisters and anger, things like that. Make sense? So you have these different collections that developed. And then they put some of these together, and oftentimes even in the systematic collection, what it will list is sayings that were originally from the alphabetic collection, then sayings that were from the anonymous, and then they'll add a few more. So sayings get collected in different groups, and for scholars who study the sayings, you have to kind of be aware of which collection you're from and what the date was and who used who and all of that sort of things. So the one thing you want to see is that, of course, being these wise sayings, their focus is not on theology or our theory of the spiritual life, but on practice, just the way that the book of Proverbs was. They are guidances for everyday living. But the audience of the sayings is not everyday living for you and me, it's everyday living for monks. We want to be, it would almost be like a side resource for novices, if you know what I mean. Here I am in Palestine, and I want to develop novices who have never been to Sketis. They have never been to Egypt. But they want to know what this tradition is about. So you write down this book of sayings and you say, oh, here you go. Here is the wise sayings that we have brought from Egypt, and we are trying to help you develop in your life as a monk. Make sense? So that's how, that's where these sayings come from and they're used for. Are we okay?
Yes.
Okay. The 21 headings, yeah, just a sec. And the other thing is that not only because you're also not only passing on wisdom, but you're also passing on a history and a little bit of the revered people. You not only give sayings, but sometimes you also tell tales. So you're also telling stories about the lives of these monks along with their sayings. Which we know, I mean, Jesus did the same thing. You know, we saw something he did that modeled the teaching. And so you get these things that go together. The 21 headings, I just read some of them for you. Advancing toward perfection. Every effort should be made to pursue hesukia, or silence. Sorrow for sin. Self-control. Some poverty, not judging people, discretion or diakrisis. Everyone should be on their watch, praying without ceasing, humility. You know, just all these virtues and statements. Just to give one sample, an elder also said, He who wishes to find healing for the severe wounds of his soul in order to be rid of sickness ought to endure the physician's treatment. One whose body is diseased does not go gladly to undergo an amputation or a purge, but recalls them with discomfort. He tells himself that it is impossible for him to be rid of his disease without them. So you've got to go. In America, we have a phrase that we call, say, no pain, no gain. You know that one? Okay. Now, I think that's the kind of thing he's saying here. He endures the physician's treatment in the knowledge that a little discomfort will relieve him of a long illness. Now, the cauterizing iron of Jesus is the one who dishonors or abuses you. So, the person who criticizes me, the person who corrects me, the person who doesn't like me in church, they are the ones who cleanse me because it sets me free of vainglory. I struggle with pride. I think I'm really important, but this person who criticizes me reminds me I'm not that important. Okay? And that's a good example of the saying of the Desert Fathers. Okay? There are lots of good teachings that we find in this literature. This is really good literature, by the way. A spiritual father, radical simplicity and common sense, charity, asceticism, prayer, and then just all kinds of virtues and things like that. Those are the kinds of values that we have in this literature. Now, I don't think I will do it, but sometimes when I teach this, I have you go ahead and write a saying. So maybe tonight, when you have a moment, think of someone who is wise to you and use this format. Pretend that you are a monk and try to remember a story and a saying of someone who was wise. Write one down and you can read it tomorrow, okay?
Write one down from theirs or one that we make up.
Oh, yeah, of a story maybe you know, or you could make up, but you know someone who was wise,
Yes.
and you have some story about something they said once.
Okay.
So make one up, write one, and then you can read it to us, as if we were going to make, in this class, we're going to make our own collection of the sayings from our wise people. Sound good?
And that's what the Desert Fathers who fled to Palestine, but they were bringing those sayings, or I'm just trying to work the whole story.
They remembered the sayings from the time of
Sketis.
living in Sketis,
Okay.
and now they need to write them down so
For
they can
the
pass the
novice.
tradition on to the next generation.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
Good. Okay, any other questions, comments? Yes?
We have this writing in Greek, in Coptic. We have the originals in Greek or Coptic, or we just have their translations now.
I know we have originals in Greek. I don't know. Can you answer the Coptic?
We have the documented is originally in Greek. We may have like fragments, Coptic fragments, but it's not the whole collection.
So we have Coptic fragments, but we do not have Coptic copies of the entire Apothigemata? Okay, okay.
So who does
And
these
it's
translations?
translated
Sorry.
from Greek to other translations, like a lot of what the other translations that we have now, it's from the Greek version.
Translations.
So who does the translations?
I mean, so much is dependent.
Tamara will do some of the translation. Christine Fozzi will do translation.
I also from English to Arabic, but
Oh, okay.
But I mean from the Coptic, which is what they were written in.
Right, yeah, there are Coptic scholars today
Who translate.
who do that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So we'll be looking at some of those sayings in the courses. If the
Exactly,
courses-
exactly.
Okay.
Yes, you'll be reading, we will have 1 week coming up where you will read sayings in the alphabetical collection, and then we'll have another week where you are reading sayings in the systematic collection. So 2 separate weeks in our
Systematic
class.
theme topics.
Yes, exactly.
We have a specific book for the saying of the fathers called the Garden of the Fathers.
Yeah, the paradise of,
Paradise.
The Paradise.
Orchard of Stellenbosch.
It's in Arabic.
yeah, the paradise of the fathers, I think is it.
That they read it from it every day in the monk, in the
Yes,
ministry.
exactly. Yeah, when you are eating.
Yeah.
Yeah. His question had to do with the Origenist controversy. And his question was, is it just that there are people on this side that think that God has physical features, and on this side that God is immaterial and does not have these physical features?
So the question is only about this. So the question is the controversy is only about this, please, or?
And he was trying to clarify what is the controversy about.
Ah, okay. Yes.
The answer to that question is she was simplifying the matter a great deal, and rightfully so, because we cannot. There are many other factors. There's the interpretation of Genesis 1:26. There is how we pray. Do we imagine Jesus or not? There is the question of what kind of experience of Christ can we as Christians expect? Maybe we actually can experience the risen Christ in our prayer, and it's actually and that Christ has a risen body that we can become like. So there's a lot of different nuances in this controversy. And
So is this kind of like the origin of the Arian controversy?
it's actually after the Arian controversy,
Right.
although people will argue that it's associated with that controversy.
Right.
But it actually happened slightly after the Arian controversy.
Okay. Good. Okay.
Is that
Like there
are we okay?
Yeah, there are some political issues as well involved.
Yeah.
So there are many aspects of this controversy. I just tried to summarize it, but there are a lot to say about it.
Is, off the top of your head, is there a good source book for
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, her thesis.
There is.
Your thesis.
My thesis is one. Elizabeth Clark book, The Origenist Controversy, is a very good book.
Okay, what's your name?
Her name is Elizabeth Clark.
Elizabeth Clark.
And just look up the Origenist controversy.
Yes. I can give you more
That's fine.
Yeah.
more references.
Thank you.
It's very complicated matter, but it moves you into all kinds of very important things. It's kind of interesting.
So it split into these monks who fled.
It did, yes.
That was probably the main. So it
Oh, that
actually spread.
That's the consequence I wanted to let you know about for this class with regard to the sayings. Is that one of the consequences of this controversy was that these 5 monks were forced to leave, and that was the beginning of a dispersion of monks into Palestine, who then were the source of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. The word asceticism derives from the Greek word askesis, which in ancient times referred to athletic training. Did you raise your hand?
No, I was just saying it's going up, right? It's like ascensions, like
No. No, askesis. The Greek word askesis, which is it's for training, like athletic training or military training, discipline. You know?
Ascesis.
Askesis. So that's where the word comes from. And the way I'm going to describe it, my working definition for the sake of this class, a Christian asceticism may be defined as the act or habit of constraining, of bringing together, reducing. I can't think of another word for constraining.
Constraints good.
Yeah, for some. I'm thinking I want to make it easier work. So anyway, human experience in the context of God's active presence. Oh, I do this again and again. And aimed at serving spiritual ends. So I'm going to restrict my experience in some fashion. I'm going to restrict my food. I'm going to restrict my sleep. I'm going to restrict the way I speak. I'm going to restrict my life in that I am going to devote much of it to prayer at this time or that time. And so I shape and govern different things I say or feel or do in order to serve spiritual ends. That's the way I'm looking at the notion of asceticism, okay?
So you said in the context of God's?
In the context of serving spiritual ends. Oh, in God's active presence, I think that's the term I use. The assumption in asceticism is not simply that, in Christian asceticism, the assumption is not that I'm just simply trying to do something to myself, but rather that God's Spirit is actively present in me, and I'm cooperating with the ministry of the Holy Spirit to become a new person. Okay? And it's very interesting that it is Mark the ascetic, who wrote the famous essay on is it works or grace, and that the maturity of our life is not by works. It's a person named Mark the ascetic who writes this. Okay, next. So now, with that in mind, I want to summarize some of the kinds of habits that characterize the ascetical life of 4th century monasticism in Egypt. Okay? Yeah, of course you know that you have fasting in the scriptures. Paul refers to fasting. You have celibacy. You have the discussion of eunuchs. You have the discussion of watching our speech. All of these different things. You have Paul talking about aiming for perfection. So the goal of perfection is all the way through the scriptures. And for some, in some of the literature, you will see even monasticism defined, the 4th century literature, we'll see monasticism defined by asceticism. So in the lives of the Desert Fathers, you hear the story of one Abba who says, in his former life, he had been a blacksmith, and he abandoned his trade to turn to ascesis. And they use the word ascesis as a summary of the way of the monastic life. You see how that works? Sometimes the whole of the monastic life is summarized by that term. Just as we read earlier when we were talking about Pachomius, when Pachomius learned about the monastic life from Polemon, his mentor, they summarized it, what is the rule of monastic life, quote unquote, that he learned was spending half the night in vigils, doing manual labor, fasting and devoting part of the day for prayer. So this is a regimen, a practice of asceticism. Okay, the act of leaving home, possessions, family, and career in withdrawal, it was not only interpreted as something that establishes you into monastic life or into a life of asceticism, but it was actually also a life habit itself, which is maintained for spiritual ends. For example, there's this very famous phrase by Abba Moses, who summarizes the way of salvation by telling a seeker, he says, give me a word of salvation. That's kind of this relationship. And Abba Moses says to him, Sit in your cell and let your cell teach you. The idea is that the very act, the very practice of withdrawal, the very practice of solitude itself will teach you. It will train you. You see what I mean? Interesting enough, I mentioned I am teaching an online class this week as well as teaching your class. My students today had just finished, they all had to go for 4 hours on a private retreat. And so they are now making the reports of what happened when they had their retreat. Because they, especially, I don't know, Americans who are really busy, they have never sat down and let their cell teach you. So this is their first experience of this. So ascetic withdrawal was understood not only as an act of personal isolation, but also a separation of yourself from society or aspects of society. And so because of that, your withdrawal, not simply from geography, but from culture and all the cultural trappings, it then promotes attitudes and conditions and ways of looking at your relationship with God that without that asceticism, that disciplining, that constraining your life, you wouldn't get otherwise. Yeah, I think that's leaving family, career, and the society meant abandoning the frameworks of meaning common to that age. I notice now I have guests that will come to my house and visit for private retreats. And I have a separate, what we call a hermit hut. And they will come. So one of the things I do is I have a little basket at the home and I say, this is for your cell phone and for your devices. And for many young people, that is very, very hard for them to leave their device behind. And that's the asceticism of withdrawing themselves from the culture so that they can devote themselves to being alone with God. Make sense? Okay. Withdrawal. That is the one thing. Then perhaps the most frequently mentioned ascetical practices of the early monks were those identified with some kind of abstinence. Abstinence from food, fasting, abstinence from sleep, vigils, abstinence from sexual activity, so you have chastity or continence or whatever word you want, abstinence from conversation, and so you'll have silence. All of these were significant disciplines in the early nuns and monks. And it's impossible, here to go through all of the details of that sort of thing. There's just a lot of literature on how they did that. Let me just go back. I mentioned yesterday that I would talk about food. I just say a couple things about eating and fasting. Lucien Renaud, I mentioned Lucien Renaud's day-to-day life yesterday. In his book, he does a really good summary. The most common practice was to abstain from food completely every second day. This was the habit with Sisos, Megathios, and no doubt many others. In addition, it was often a penance imposed on a brother who has sinned grievously. In any case, little by little, experience showed the fathers that it was better to eat a little bit every day than eat a lot every 2 days.
Really?
What?
No, I was just surprised. saying of the prophet that the best type of fasting was that practiced by Dawood or David, and that he ate one day and fasted the next. But this is different. It's saying that it's better to eat a little every day instead of just eating every other day.
Correct, correct. The idea is that your body gets used to, instead of trying to make a heroic thing and then failing and then making a heroic thing and failing, you find some minimal, measure that you will constantly live with. This was the advice given by Agathon and Piman. In his youth, the latter would pass often 2, 3, 4 days or a whole week without eating, but later found it better to eat a little each day. Do you see what I'm saying? This is their pattern. This he called the royal path of the fathers. Augustine of Hippo was noted for his moderation. His biographer recounted that quote, and I'm quoting from the person who wrote Augustine's biography. His table was frugal and sparing, indeed with herbs and lentils. He had meat at times for the sake of his guests, but he always had wine because he knew, as he taught, every creature of God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified through the word of God and prayer. You will find Augustine, almost every case, Augustine is characterized by moderation. In Greece, in Egypt, and then even more so in Palestine and Syria, you'll have extremes. But Augustine is very, very moderate in his way of doing things. Oh, yes, and I wanted to mention, the friend Jean Cashin writes about 3 types of gluttony. Do you know the term gluttony?
Yes, China.
Okay. There are 3 types John Cashin writes about. One has to do with eating, okay? One has to do with eating prior to the appointed time for eating. The other is eating excessive amounts of food. And the other has to do with over-attention to rare or delicate dishes, like the biscuits next door, or espresso.
You mean like having a preference for, say, ethnic food?
Yeah, or you need to have really the.
Yeah.
In America, we have foodies.
Yeah,
Do you know
they're
foodie?
here too.
Okay.
That's what it is?
Yeah, no, the term is a foodie.
Okay.
F-O-O-D-I-E. Really into the best foods. Now, in Coptic circles, do you, in the Coptic church, do you have the same 3 kinds of gluttony? Time, amount, and delicacy, the kind of food?
Concerning the food?
Yeah, is that something you talk about, those 3 different kinds of gluttony?
We talk about it in general, but not like...
In fasting, you mean?
No,
Or
the food,
daily
the
life?
gluttony.
Yeah, daily life.
Of course we do, yeah. Of course we
Abstaining
do.
from,
The church teaches us not to eat too much, not to eat very expensive food.
keep it simple.
Okay.
In Upper Egypt, I knew a lady, she liked fish. So even in a fast which allows the eating of fish, she wouldn't eat it because she was trying to abstain from things that she likes too much.
Yeah.
So when someone is really into chocolate, for example, so you don't eat that. Even when it was allowed, she wouldn't eat it because
Yes, yeah,
something
because
she
you know
liked so much.
what it is you are attached to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, a different kind of abstaining is the abstaining and avoidance of judgment against others. And the literature of the 4th century talks a lot about this. This is part of your asceticism. Pet personal ideas. I told you the story of Abba Moses carrying the buckets, and that sort of thing. So you understand it. And there's a lot of literature, a lot of stories that talk about acceptance of one another and not judgmenting, that kind of thing. There's actually, because we're going to get to Evagrius Pontus, I want to tell a story about him. He had been, prior to his coming to Egypt, he had been a recognized scholar in Constantinople, and like PhD. And so he had all of the academic credentials, these things. But then he becomes a monk in Egypt. And so one day in the cells, there is this assembly. And people are gathering and they're talking about something. And Evagrius, probably they say Evagrius held forth. That means Evagrius gave his arrogant opinion about some topic. You know what I mean? And the priest looks at Evagrius and says, Abba, we know that if you were living in your own country, you would probably be a bishop and a great leader. But at present, you sit here a stranger. And Evagrius was filled with compunction, but was not all upset. And bending his head, he replied, I have spoken once, and I will not answer. Twice, but I will not proceed. You see, so you get this idea that not only not judgmenting, but knowing your place. Is that an okay word? Yeah, in the community. Another category of asceticism in the 4th century literature is perseverance. Staying with something even that it is difficult. And again, there's this delightful story of Ammonius of Alexandria. As he sat in the morning of his cell, a mosquito landed on his foot and bit him, And feeling the pain, he squashed it with his hands, and there was blood, and he realized what he had done. So, accusing himself of taking vengeance, he realized he had just was angry and vengeant in his treatment of this mosquito. He condemned himself to sit naked for 6 months in the marshes of Skeet. And the mosquitoes there are like wasps, that says, and even pierce the hides of wild boars. So then he was bitten all over and developed so many swellings that some thought he had a disease, elephantitis, So returning to his cell after 6 months, he was recognized only by his voice that he was Macarius himself. You're familiar with this story? Yeah, okay. But it's you get these sayings and these stories. And another part of perseverance in this literature is maintaining a cheerful attitude through illness or suffering.
Oh, that's really not me. I'm just saying that that's really not me. I'm not very religious, obviously. I'm terribly grumpy and very
Alma Syncletica writes a lot about this. She is, Elizabeth Castile describes Alma Syncletica as a woman who dedicated herself early on to a life of fasting, voluntary poverty, and mortifications, or controlling the flesh, and whose extended illnesses and eventually death became a special form of ascetic practice, the endurance of illness. And Syncletica was famous for teaching you to endure illness cheerfully is actually part of your discipline. So, in addition to the disciplines of abstinence, early monks and nuns also practiced a host of disciplines of engagement. So some things we stay away from. We stay away from food, we stay away from judgment, and we stay away from criticism and angry thoughts when we are suffering, okay? Then there's all these things like engagement, manual labor, spiritual warfare, reading and studying, and prayer, of course, self-examination. They characterize the life of the ascetic. And many desert mothers were known, it's interesting, when you read the literature on the desert mothers, they talk a lot more often about the discipline of study. And I think maybe because it was something a little bit unique for women to devote themselves to study, and so they emphasize that in the literature. Finally, I want to mention that the life of the community itself can be a form of discipline or asceticism. Relationships, obedience, kindness, all these virtues are fostered through community.